Sarah Martinez walked through the crowded hallway of her new office building, her worn sneakers making soft sounds against the polished marble floor. She clutched a folder containing her employment papers, trying to blend into the sea of perfectly dressed employees rushing to their morning meetings. Her simple jeans and navy blue sweater seemed out of place among the expensive suits and designer dresses that surrounded her. The transition from military life to corporate America had been harder than any mission she had ever completed. After 8 years as a Navy SEAL, including 3 tours in Afghanistan and countless classified operations, Sarah thought adapting to civilian life would be straightforward. She was wrong. The skills that made her exceptional in the field seemed to have little value in the business world, at least according to the dozens of rejection letters she had received over the past 6 months. Her new job at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions was supposed to be a fresh start. The position was entry-level, far below her qualifications, but it came with health insurance and a steady paycheck. More importantly, it was a chance to prove that veterans could succeed in environments that had nothing to do with combat or military strategy. Sarah had convinced herself that keeping her military background quiet would help her fit in better. She learned quickly that this decision would bring unexpected challenges. As she approached the reception desk, Sarah noticed a group of well-dressed women clustered near the elevator bank. Their laughter echoed through the lobby, sharp and cutting. One of them, a tall blonde woman in an expensive black dress, pointed in Sarah's direction and whispered something to her companions. The group erupted in giggles, their eyes scanning Sarah from head to toe with obvious judgment. "Excuse me, are you lost?" The blonde woman stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The custodial services entrance is around back." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks but maintained her composure. Years of military training had taught her to assess situations quickly and respond appropriately. This was not a battlefield, and these women were not enemy combatants. They were simply bullies who mistook kindness for weakness. "I'm Sarah Martinez," she replied calmly, extending her hand. "I'm starting in the marketing department today." The woman looked at Sarah's outstretched hand as if it might contaminate her manicured fingers. "Oh, you're the charity case," she said with a smirk. "I'm Victoria Blackwood, Senior Marketing Director. I heard they were hiring someone from Humble Beginnings." The other women snickered behind Victoria, clearly enjoying the show. Sarah recognized the dynamic immediately. Victoria was the alpha, and the others followed her lead. In military terms, Victoria was establishing dominance over what she perceived as a weaker target. What Victoria didn't know was that Sarah had faced down actual threats that would make these office politics seem like children's games. "Well, Sarah from Humble Beginnings," Victoria continued, "let me give you some friendly advice. This isn't the kind of place where you can just show up and expect to succeed. We have standards here. We work with high-profile clients who expect a certain level of sophistication." Sarah nodded politely, though every instinct told her to respond with the directness that had served her well in the military. Instead, she chose to observe and gather intelligence about her new environment. She had learned long ago that the loudest person in the room was rarely the most dangerous. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and Victoria gestured dramatically for Sarah to enter first. "After you, newcomer. Try not to touch anything expensive." During the ride to the 15th floor, Victoria continued her subtle assault. She asked pointed questions about Sarah's education, her previous work experience, and her family background. Each question was designed to highlight the differences between them, to establish a hierarchy that placed Victoria firmly at the top. Sarah answered honestly, but briefly. She had attended community college on a part-time basis while serving her country. Her previous work experience was government service, which wasn't technically a lie. Her family background was middle class, which seemed to confirm Victoria's assumptions about her social status. When they reached the marketing department, Victoria made a grand show of introducing Sarah to the team. "Everyone, meet our new addition, Sarah Martinez. She's here to help with our more basic tasks." The department was an open workspace filled with young professionals who looked like they had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Sarah quickly realized that appearances mattered more than substance in this environment. The walls were covered with awards and photos of successful campaigns, evidence of the team's talent and achievements. Victoria assigned Sarah a small desk in the corner, far from the main action. "You'll be starting with data entry and filing," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Once you prove you can handle simple tasks, we might consider giving you more responsibility." Sarah accepted the assignment without complaint, though she knew it was designed to be humiliating. In the SEALs, she had managed complex logistics operations and led teams of highly trained soldiers. She had made split-second decisions that saved lives and completed missions that others deemed impossible. But here she was being treated like an intern who couldn't be trusted with anything important. As the day progressed, Victoria's behavior became increasingly hostile. She would walk by Sarah's desk and make comments about her clothes, her typing speed, or her apparent confusion about office procedures. Her followers joined in, creating an atmosphere of constant judgment and criticism. During lunch, Sarah sat alone in the cafeteria, while Victoria held court at a large table surrounded by admirers. She could hear fragments of their conversation, peppered with references to expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, and exclusive social events. It was a world that Sarah had never been part of and had no desire to join. What bothered Sarah most wasn't the social exclusion or the professional disrespect. It was the waste of human potential that she witnessed. Victoria was clearly intelligent and capable, but she used her abilities to tear others down rather than build them up. In the military, leaders were measured by how well they developed their subordinates, not by how effectively they could humiliate them. As Sarah walked back to her desk after lunch, she made a decision that would change everything. She would not quit, no matter how difficult Victoria made her life. She would not fight back using Victoria's methods of gossip and social manipulation. Instead, she would do what she had always done in challenging situations: excel through quiet competence and let her results speak for themselves. Victoria Blackwood had no idea that she had just declared war on someone who had been trained to win against impossible odds. The harassment escalated over the following weeks. Victoria seemed to take personal pleasure in making Sarah's work life as difficult as possible. She would pile on last-minute assignments just as Sarah was preparing to leave for the day, schedule important meetings without informing Sarah, and then criticize her for missing crucial information. The data entry work that was supposed to be temporary stretched on indefinitely, keeping Sarah isolated from any meaningful projects. Sarah's military background had taught her patience and strategic thinking. While Victoria focused on short-term victories through humiliation, Sarah was playing a longer game. She arrived early every morning and stayed late every evening, not because Victoria demanded it, but because she was studying the company's operations, learning about their clients, and identifying areas where improvements could be made. During her lunch breaks, Sarah would sit in her car and research Pinnacle Marketing Solutions' biggest accounts. She studied their marketing campaigns, analyzed their target demographics, and examined their competitors' strategies. What she discovered surprised her. Despite their polished appearance and expensive educations, the marketing team was producing mediocre results for several major clients. The breakthrough came during a Friday afternoon crisis. Pinnacle's biggest client, a luxury hotel chain called Azure Resorts, was threatening to terminate their contract. Their latest marketing campaign had failed spectacularly, resulting in decreased bookings and negative social media attention. The campaign, designed entirely by Victoria's team, had focused on exclusivity and sophistication, but had alienated potential customers who felt the messaging was pretentious and out of touch. Sarah watched from her corner desk as Victoria held an emergency meeting with the senior staff. Through the glass conference room walls, she could see the panic on everyone's faces as they tried to salvage the situation. Victoria was gesticulating wildly, clearly trying to shift blame to external factors rather than accepting responsibility for the campaign's failure. When the meeting ended, Sarah noticed that Victoria looked defeated for the first time since she had started working there. The other team members scattered quickly, avoiding eye contact with their leader. Sarah recognized the signs of a unit that had lost confidence in its commander. In the military, this was often when the real leaders emerged from unexpected places. That evening, Sarah worked late again, but this time she wasn't doing data entry. Using her personal laptop, she began crafting a comprehensive analysis of the Azure Resort situation. She identified the fundamental disconnect between the campaign's message and the actual desires of the target audience. More importantly, she developed a complete strategy to not only recover the lost ground, but to exceed the client's original expectations. Sarah's approach was different from anything Victoria's team had tried. Instead of focusing on abstract concepts like luxury and exclusivity, She proposed a campaign built around authentic experiences and genuine connections. She had learned during her military service that people responded better to honest communication than to manipulative marketing tactics. The strategy included a detailed timeline, budget projections, and specific tactics for implementation across multiple platforms. Sarah drew on her experience coordinating complex military operations to create a plan that was both ambitious and achievable. She worked through the weekend, refining every detail until she was confident that the proposal was bulletproof. Monday morning brought another crisis. Azure Resorts had officially terminated their contract, and Victoria was summoned to an emergency meeting with the company's executive team. Sarah could hear raised voices through the closed doors as Victoria attempted to explain how $1 million account had been lost. When Victoria emerged from the meeting, her face was pale and her usual confidence had evaporated. She gathered her team for a briefing, informing them that they had exactly 1 week to develop a proposal that might convince Azure Resorts to reconsider their decision. The atmosphere in the department was tense and desperate. Sarah made her decision during lunch that day. She printed out her proposal, placed it in a manila envelope, and walked directly to the executive floor. She had never spoken to any of the senior management team, but she knew that desperate situations called for bold actions. The executive assistant tried to turn her away, explaining that the senior partners were too busy to see anyone without an appointment. Sarah politely but firmly explained that she had information that could save the Azure Resorts account. Something in her tone, perhaps the quiet confidence that had served her well in high-pressure military situations, convinced the assistant to deliver the message. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself sitting across from Thomas Hartwell, the company's founding partner. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, who had built Pinnacle from a small startup into one of the city's most successful marketing firms. His office walls were covered with awards and photos of successful campaigns spanning 3 decades. "I understand you think you can save our relationship with Azure Resorts," he said, studying Sarah with keen eyes. "Victoria Blackwood has been telling me that the situation is hopeless, that the client's expectations were unreasonable from the beginning." Sarah placed her proposal on his desk and began explaining her analysis. She spoke clearly and concisely, drawing on her military training to present complex information in an easily digestible format. She didn't criticize Victoria's approach directly, but her alternative strategy made the flaws in the original campaign obvious by comparison. As Thomas reviewed the proposal, his expression changed from skeptical curiosity to genuine interest. Sarah had anticipated every possible objection and provided data-driven solutions for each challenge. Her timeline was aggressive but realistic, and her budget projections showed how the campaign could deliver better results while actually costing less than Victoria's original plan. "This is impressive work," Thomas said finally. "How long did it take you to put this together?" "I've been working on it since Friday evening," Sarah replied honestly. Thomas leaned back in his chair, clearly processing this information. "And you did this while working in data entry without access to our usual research resources or client files?" Sarah nodded. "I used publicly available information and applied analytical techniques I learned in my previous career." "What exactly was your previous career, Miss Martinez?" For the first time since starting at Pinnacle, Sarah decided to tell the complete truth. "I was a Navy SEAL for 8 years. I specialized in intelligence analysis and strategic planning." The silence that followed was profound. Thomas stared at her for a long moment as if seeing her for the first time. Finally, he picked up his phone and dialed an extension. "Cancel my next meeting," he said, "and ask Victoria Blackwood to come to my office immediately. We need to have a conversation about leadership and talent recognition." Sarah realized that the real battle was about to begin, but for the first time since leaving the military, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Victoria knocked on Thomas Hartwell's office door with her usual confidence, expecting another discussion about damage control for the Azure Resort situation. She had spent the morning preparing excuses and explanations, ready to deflect responsibility while maintaining her position as the department's leader. What she wasn't prepared for was finding Sarah Martinez sitting calmly in one of the leather chairs facing Thomas's desk. "Victoria, please have a seat," Thomas said, his tone unreadable. "We need to discuss some recent developments." Victoria's eyes darted between Thomas and Sarah, trying to assess the situation. In her experience, entry-level employees didn't get invited to meetings with senior partners unless they were in serious trouble. She assumed Sarah had made some kind of mistake that required her immediate supervisor's attention. "I hope this won't take long," Victoria said, settling into the remaining chair with an air of impatience. "I'm working on several urgent projects related to the Azure situation." Thomas picked up Sarah's proposal from his desk and placed it in front of Victoria. "I'd like you to review this strategic plan for recovering the Azure Resorts account. Take your time and give me your honest assessment." Victoria glanced at the document dismissively, assuming it was some kind of training exercise or template that Thomas wanted her opinion on. As she began reading, however, her expression changed dramatically. The proposal was sophisticated, comprehensive, and addressed every weakness in her original campaign with surgical precision. The strategy was built around authentic storytelling, rather than artificial exclusivity. Instead of positioning Azure Resorts as unattainable luxury, the new approach focused on creating genuine connections between guests and their travel experiences. The campaign included partnerships with local communities, environmental sustainability initiatives, and personalized service offerings that would differentiate Azure from their competitors. What impressed Victoria most, and worried her simultaneously, was the level of detail in the implementation plan. The proposal included specific social media strategies, influencer partnerships, content creation timelines, and measurable success metrics. It was the kind of thorough, strategic thinking that she had been struggling to achieve for months. "This is excellent work," Victoria said carefully, trying to maintain her composure. "Which consulting firm did you hire to develop this?" Thomas smiled slightly. "Actually, this proposal was created entirely in-house by one of your team members." Victoria's mind raced through the possibilities. She knew the capabilities of everyone in her department, and none of them had demonstrated this level of strategic insight. Her best people were talented at execution, but they lacked the big-picture thinking that this proposal represented. "I'm curious about your thoughts on the author's qualifications," Thomas continued. "What kind of background and experience would someone need to develop a strategy of this caliber?" Victoria found herself in an uncomfortable position. If she praised the proposal too highly, she would be acknowledging that someone in her department had capabilities she had failed to recognize or utilize. If she criticized it, she would be questioning Thomas's judgment in bringing it to her attention. "Well," she said slowly, "this level of strategic analysis would typically require significant experience in high-level marketing roles, probably with a master's degree in business or marketing and exposure to complex client relationships." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what I would have expected you to say." He turned to Sarah. "Would you like to share your actual qualifications with Victoria?" Sarah had been watching the exchange with the calm observation skills that had served her well in countless military briefings. She could see Victoria's growing anxiety as the conversation progressed, but she felt no satisfaction in her discomfort. This wasn't about revenge or personal victory. It was about proving that good ideas could come from unexpected sources. "I have an associate degree in business administration from a community college," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "My previous experience was 8 years in the Navy SEALs, where I specialized in intelligence analysis and strategic planning operations." The color drained from Victoria's face as she processed this information. The quiet woman she had been treating like an incompetent intern was not only highly qualified but had been developing solutions to problems that Victoria's entire team had been unable to solve. Thomas watched Victoria's reaction carefully. "Sarah brought this proposal to me this morning. She developed it over the weekend using only publicly available information and her own analytical skills. She's requesting permission to present it directly to Azure Resorts as a potential path forward." Victoria's first instinct was to object, to find some reason why this approach wouldn't work, or why Sarah wasn't qualified to interact with such an important client. But as she looked at the proposal again, she realized that her objections would sound petty and unprofessional. The strategy was simply too good to dismiss. "I appreciate Sarah's initiative," Victoria said carefully, "but I think it would be more appropriate for me to present the proposal to the client. After all, I have the existing relationship with Azure, and they're expecting to work with senior-level personnel." Thomas leaned forward slightly. "Victoria, I want you to think carefully about what you're saying. You're suggesting that the person who identified the problems with our original approach and developed a comprehensive solution shouldn't be involved in presenting that solution to the client. The implication was clear, and Victoria realized she was walking into a trap of her own making. If she insisted on taking credit for Sarah's work, she would be exposing herself as the kind of manager who stole ideas from subordinates. If she allowed Sarah to present the proposal, she would be acknowledging that her own leadership had failed to recognize and utilize available talent. Sarah decided to offer Victoria a way out of the impossible situation. "I think Victoria makes a good point about client relationships," she said diplomatically. "Perhaps we could present the proposal together. Victoria's experience with Azure's preferences could help tailor the presentation for maximum impact." This suggestion demonstrated the kind of team-first thinking that Victoria had never shown towards Sarah. Instead of claiming sole credit or undermining her supervisor, Sarah was offering to share the spotlight while still ensuring that her ideas would be heard. Thomas smiled approvingly at Sarah's suggestion. "That sounds like an excellent approach. Victoria, I trust you can work with Sarah to prepare a joint presentation for later this week." As the meeting concluded, Victoria realized that her entire perspective on Sarah had been wrong from the beginning. The woman she had dismissed as a charity case was actually one of the most qualified people in the building. More troubling was the recognition that Sarah's generous response to this situation revealed a level of character and leadership that Victoria wasn't sure she possessed herself. Walking back to the marketing department together, Victoria struggled with how to address the dramatic shift in their working relationship. Sarah seemed content to let actions speak louder than words, but Victoria knew that some kind of acknowledgement was necessary. "Sarah," she said as they approached their desks, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about you that were completely unfounded, and I haven't been treating you with the respect you deserve." Sarah stopped and turned to face Victoria directly. "I appreciate that, but what matters now is working together to save this account. We both want Pinnacle to succeed." Victoria nodded, realizing that Sarah was offering her a second chance to be the kind of leader she had always claimed to be. The question was whether she would be wise enough to take it. The joint presentation to Azure Resorts was scheduled for Thursday morning, giving Victoria and Sarah 3 days to prepare. What should have been a collaborative effort quickly revealed the depth of the problems in Victoria's leadership style. Despite her public apology, Victoria struggled to treat Sarah as an equal partner in the project. Victoria's first instinct was to take control of the entire presentation, relegating Sarah to a supporting role that would minimize her visibility to the client. She scheduled preparation meetings without including Sarah, made unilateral decisions about the presentation format, and attempted to rewrite significant portions of the strategy to reflect her own preferred approach. Sarah watched these developments with the patience of someone who had dealt with difficult commanding officers before. She recognized that Victoria was operating from a place of fear rather than malice. The successful marketing director had built her career on being the smartest person in the room, and Sarah's emergence as a strategic thinker threatened that identity. On Tuesday morning, Sarah made a decision that would force the issue into the open. Instead of fighting Victoria's attempts to control the presentation, she requested a private meeting with Thomas Hartwell to discuss her concerns about the direction of the project. Thomas listened carefully as Sarah explained the situation. She didn't criticize Victoria personally, but she outlined specific examples of how the collaborative approach was being undermined. Most importantly, she presented evidence that Victoria's proposed changes would weaken the strategy's effectiveness and reduce the likelihood of winning back the Azure account. "What do you recommend?" Thomas asked. "Give me the authority to present the strategy directly to Azure," Sarah said. "Victoria can participate as much or as little as she chooses, but the client needs to hear from the person who actually developed the solution." Thomas considered this request carefully. He had built Pinnacle Marketing Solutions by recognizing talent and giving capable people the authority to succeed. At the same time, he knew that bypassing Victoria completely would create significant internal problems and potentially damage her reputation beyond repair. "I have a different idea," he said finally. "I'm going to attend the Azure presentation personally, along with both you and Victoria. This will demonstrate to the client how seriously we're taking their concerns, and it will ensure that the best ideas get proper representation." That afternoon, Thomas called Victoria into his office and informed her of his decision to attend the presentation. He didn't explicitly mention Sarah's concerns, but his presence would clearly limit Victoria's ability to control the narrative or take inappropriate credit for the strategy. Victoria realized that she was facing a career-defining moment. She could continue trying to undermine Sarah and risk exposing herself as a poor leader in front of the company's founder, or she could embrace the collaborative approach and potentially salvage her reputation. The choice was hers, but the stakes couldn't be higher. Wednesday evening found Sarah and Victoria working late in the conference room, making final preparations for the presentation. The atmosphere was tense but professional. Victoria had finally accepted that Sarah's strategy was superior to anything her own team had developed, but she struggled with the implications of that recognition. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said during a break in their preparations. "Why didn't you mention your military background when you started here? If people had known you were a Navy SEAL, you would have been treated very differently." Sarah looked up from the presentation slides she was reviewing. "Because I wanted to be evaluated based on my current work, not my past achievements. I've seen too many veterans who got hired for their military credentials, but then struggled when they couldn't adapt to civilian environments." "But you clearly adapted just fine," Victoria pointed out. "Your strategy is better than anything my team has produced in months." "The military taught me how to analyze complex situations and develop effective solutions," Sarah replied. "But those skills only matter if people are willing to listen to the ideas regardless of who presents them." Victoria felt the weight of that statement. She had spent weeks dismissing Sarah's potential contributions based entirely on superficial judgments about her background and appearance. How many other talented people had she overlooked? Because they didn't fit her narrow definition of what success looked like. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that preceded major military operations. Sarah felt the familiar combination of anticipation and focus that had served her well in high-stakes situations. Victoria, meanwhile, seemed increasingly anxious as the presentation time approached. The Azure Resorts team consisted of 3 executives: CEO Margaret Chen, Marketing Director James Rodriguez, and Operations Manager Linda Foster. They entered Pinnacle's conference room with the polite but skeptical demeanor of people who had been disappointed before and were prepared to be disappointed again. Thomas opened the meeting by acknowledging the previous campaign's shortcomings and introducing the team that had developed a new strategic approach. He presented Sarah as the lead strategist, with Victoria providing additional context based on her existing relationship with the account. Sarah began the presentation with a frank assessment of why the original campaign had failed. She didn't blame external factors or make excuses. Instead, she identified specific disconnects between the campaign's messaging and the actual desires of Azure's target customers. Her analysis was data-driven, objective, and impossible to argue with. The new strategy she presented was the opposite of everything the original campaign had represented. Instead of emphasizing exclusivity and sophistication, the new approach focused on authentic experiences and genuine connections. Instead of making potential guests feel inadequate, the campaign would invite them to discover their own capacity for adventure and growth. "Margaret," Chen interrupted the presentation with a question that revealed the depth of Azure's frustration with their previous marketing efforts. "This sounds wonderful in theory, but how do we know it will actually work? We've been burned before by beautiful presentations that didn't translate into results." Sarah had anticipated this question and prepared a response that drew on her military experience with performance, measurement, and accountability. She outlined specific metrics for measuring success, established clear timelines for achieving results, and proposed a phased implementation approach that would allow for course corrections based on real-world feedback. More importantly, she volunteered to personally guarantee the campaign's performance by tying her own compensation to the achievement of specific goals. It was a level of accountability that Victoria had never offered, and it demonstrated Sarah's confidence in her strategy. James Rodriguez leaned forward with obvious interest. "You're willing to put your own money on the line for this campaign?" "I'm willing to put my reputation on the line," Sarah replied. "If this strategy doesn't deliver the results we're projecting, you shouldn't pay for the campaign, and you probably shouldn't work with our company in the future." The room fell silent as the Azure executives absorbed this statement. They had never encountered a marketing professional who was willing to accept that level of personal responsibility for campaign performance. Victoria watched in amazement as Sarah transformed a routine business presentation into something that felt more like a sacred commitment. "Margaret." Chen looked at her colleagues and then back at Sarah. "When can you start?" The success of the Azure Resorts presentation created immediate changes throughout Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. Word spread quickly through the office that the quiet woman from data entry had not only saved their biggest account, but had also revealed herself to be a former Navy SEAL with exceptional strategic capabilities. The revelation transformed Sarah from an invisible employee into the most talked-about person in the building. Victoria found herself in an impossible position. Her leadership credibility had been severely damaged by her failure to recognize Sarah's potential, but she was also tied to the success of the Azure campaign. Thomas Hartwell made it clear that Victoria would remain as the account's primary manager, working closely with Sarah to implement the new strategy. It was both an opportunity for redemption and a daily reminder of her past failures. The other employees who had participated in the bullying began to distance themselves from Victoria's previous behavior. People who had laughed at Sarah's clothes and questioned her qualifications now competed for opportunities to work with her on projects. The sudden shift in office dynamics was both dramatic and revealing of how quickly workplace hierarchies could change when real competence was recognized. Sarah handled her newfound status with the same quiet professionalism she had shown during her weeks of harassment. She didn't gloat about her vindication or seek revenge against those who had treated her poorly. Instead, she focused entirely on delivering results for Azure Resorts and proving that her strategy could succeed in the real world. The campaign implementation began immediately, and Sarah approached it with the same methodical precision she had applied to military operations. She created detailed timelines, established clear communication protocols, and built redundancy into every aspect of the project to ensure that unexpected challenges wouldn't derail their progress. Working with Azure's marketing team, Sarah discovered that the hotel chain's previous campaigns had failed because they focused on what the company wanted to say rather than what potential guests wanted to hear. The original messaging emphasized luxury and exclusivity in ways that made ordinary travelers feel unwelcome and inadequate. Sarah's alternative approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of selling an unattainable lifestyle, the new campaign would sell authentic experiences that anyone could enjoy. The marketing materials would feature real guests having genuine moments of joy, discovery, and connection, rather than staged scenes of artificial perfection. The first phase of the campaign launched 6 weeks after the presentation, starting with a complete overhaul of Azure's social media presence. Instead of posting carefully curated images of empty pools and pristine lobbies, the new content featured actual guests sharing their favorite moments from their stays. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Guest engagement increased by 300% in the first month, with people sharing their own Azure experiences and tagging friends who might enjoy similar adventures. The authentic approach created a sense of community around the brand that had been completely absent from their previous marketing efforts. Victoria watched these developments with a complex mixture of admiration and regret. She had to admit that Sarah's strategy was not only working, but exceeding everyone's expectations. More difficult to accept was the recognition that she could have been part of this success from the beginning, if she had been wise enough to recognize talent when it appeared in unexpected packages. The transformation in Victoria's behavior was gradual but noticeable. She began asking Sarah for input on other accounts, genuinely listening to her suggestions and giving her credit for successful innovations. It was a humbling experience for someone who had built her career on being the smartest person in every room. But it was also educational in ways that her expensive MBA program had never been. 3 months after the campaign launch, Azure Resorts reported their highest booking rates in company history. The authentic messaging had attracted new customer segments while retaining their traditional guests, creating unprecedented growth across all properties. More importantly, customer satisfaction scores had increased dramatically, suggesting that the campaign's promise of genuine experiences was being delivered by the hotels themselves. Thomas Hartwell called a company-wide meeting to celebrate the success and announce several organizational changes that reflected the lessons learned from the Azure situation. Sarah was promoted to Senior Strategic Consultant, a newly created position that would allow her to work with multiple accounts while developing innovative approaches to client challenges. Victoria's promotion was more complex. She was elevated to Executive Marketing Director, a role that carried greater responsibility, but also required her to focus on developing other people's talents rather than hoarding opportunities for herself. Thomas made it clear that her future success would be measured by her ability to recognize and nurture capabilities in others, regardless of their backgrounds or appearances. The company also implemented new hiring and evaluation practices designed to identify overlooked talent. The Azure experience had demonstrated that exceptional capabilities could be found in unexpected places, and Pinnacle wanted to ensure they never again missed opportunities to work with gifted individuals because of superficial judgment. Sarah's success story began attracting attention from other veterans who were struggling with the transition to civilian careers. She started receiving calls and emails from former service members who had heard about her experience and wanted advice about navigating corporate environments. These conversations led to Sarah proposing a veterans mentorship program that would help Pinnacle identify and support military personnel seeking civilian careers. The program became a model for other companies in the city, demonstrating that veterans brought valuable skills to civilian workplaces when they were given appropriate opportunities to demonstrate their capabilities. Sarah's initiative not only helped individual veterans but also changed how businesses thought about military experience as a professional qualification. Victoria participated enthusiastically in the veterans program, partly as a way to atone for her previous behavior, but also because she genuinely wanted to learn from people whose experiences were different from her own. Working with former military personnel taught her to value substance over style and to recognize that true leadership often came from unexpected sources. As the one-year anniversary of Sarah's hiring approached, Thomas Hartwell reflected on how dramatically one person's arrival had changed his company's culture and performance. The Azure account had been saved, but more importantly, Pinnacle had learned to value talent over pedigree and results over appearances. Sarah's office was now located on the executive floor, with windows overlooking the city where she had once felt so out of place. The transformation was remarkable, but what impressed Thomas most was that success hadn't changed Sarah's fundamental character. She remained humble, hardworking, and focused on helping others succeed rather than promoting herself. The real test of the changes at Pinnacle would come when the next underestimated person walked through their doors, hoping for a chance to prove their worth. 2 years had passed since Sarah Martinez first walked into Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, wearing worn sneakers and carrying a folder of employment papers. The company had transformed dramatically during that time, becoming known throughout the industry as an organization that valued talent over credentials and results over appearances. Sarah's influence extended far beyond the Azure Resorts campaign that had launched her career in marketing. The Veterans Mentorship program that Sarah had initiated was now serving as a model for businesses across the country. Dozens of former military personnel had found meaningful careers through Pinnacle's innovative approach to recognizing transferable skills. The program's success had earned the company numerous awards and had attracted clients who specifically wanted to work with organizations that valued diversity of experience. Victoria Blackwood had undergone her own remarkable transformation during this period. The woman who had once derived satisfaction from humiliating newcomers had become one of the company's most effective developers of talent. Her experience with Sarah had taught her to look beyond surface appearances and to recognize that extraordinary capabilities often came disguised as ordinary people. The morning that would test everything Pinnacle had learned began like any other day, but it would end with a reminder that some lessons needed to be reinforced rather than simply remembered. A new employee named Marcus Thompson arrived for his first day of work, carrying himself with the quiet dignity that Sarah recognized immediately as a hallmark of military service. Marcus was a former Army Ranger who had served 4 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan before being medically discharged after an injury that left him with a slight limp. His resume showed a gap of nearly 2 years as he struggled with the transition to civilian life, dealing with both physical rehabilitation and the psychological challenges that many veterans faced when leaving military service. Sarah watched from her executive office as Marcus made his way through the same lobby where she had first encountered Victoria's cruelty. The parallels were striking, but the differences were equally significant. Marcus carried himself with the controlled confidence of someone who had faced genuine dangers, but his eyes showed the wariness of a person who had been rejected too many times by potential employers who couldn't see past his limitations to recognize his strengths. Victoria was no longer the person who greeted new employees in the lobby, having been promoted to a role that focused on strategic client relationships. The responsibility for welcoming newcomers now fell to Jennifer Walsh, a young marketing coordinator who had joined the company 6 months earlier. Jennifer had heard the stories about Sarah's early experiences at Pinnacle, but she had never witnessed the kind of casual cruelty that had once been commonplace in the office. Unfortunately, not everyone at Pinnacle had learned the lessons that Sarah's success was meant to teach. A small group of newer employees, led by a recent MBA graduate named Brad Collins, had developed their own hierarchy based on educational credentials and social connections. They had arrived after Sarah's transformation from data entry clerk to strategic consultant, so they viewed her success as an exception, rather than an example of the company's values. Brad noticed Marcus immediately and began making the same kinds of assumptions that Victoria had once made about Sarah. He saw the discount store clothes, the obvious nervousness about fitting into a corporate environment, and the slight physical impairment that Marcus tried to minimize but couldn't completely hide. To Brad, these were signs of someone who didn't belong in a high-level marketing firm. During the morning break, Brad gathered his followers around the coffee station and began making comments about the company's apparent decision to hire charity cases instead of qualified professionals. His jokes were cruel and loud enough for Marcus to overhear, creating exactly the kind of hostile environment that Sarah had endured during her early weeks at the company. Sarah was reviewing quarterly reports when Jennifer knocked on her office door, clearly distressed about something she had witnessed. She described Brad's behavior and expressed concern that Marcus was already being subjected to the kind of treatment that could drive away talented employees before their capabilities were recognized. The situation presented Sarah with an interesting challenge. She could intervene directly, using her authority as a senior executive to shut down Brad's behavior immediately. Alternatively, she could allow the situation to develop naturally, trusting that the systems and culture changes implemented over the past 2 years would eventually address the problem. There was also a third option that appealed to her sense of justice and her understanding of how lasting change actually occurred. Sarah decided to give Brad and his followers enough rope to hang themselves while ensuring that Marcus received the support he needed to succeed. She asked Jennifer to schedule a meeting with Marcus to discuss his background and capabilities, ostensibly as part of the standard new employee orientation process. In reality, she wanted to assess his potential and develop a strategy for showcasing his talents in ways that would expose the foolishness of judging people based on superficial characteristics. The meeting with Marcus revealed exactly what Sarah had expected to find. Beneath the nervous exterior was a highly intelligent individual with exceptional analytical skills and a deep understanding of crisis management. His military experience included coordinating complex logistics operations under extreme pressure, managing diverse teams in challenging environments, and developing innovative solutions to problems that had no precedents or standard procedures. More importantly, Marcus possessed the kind of character that made great leaders. He was modest about his achievements, generous in crediting others for successes, and focused on mission accomplishment rather than personal recognition. These qualities had served him well in the military, but they made him vulnerable to workplace bullies who mistook humility for weakness. Sarah developed a plan that would accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously. She would give Marcus an opportunity to demonstrate his capabilities while creating a situation that would reveal Brad's true character to the entire company. Most importantly, she would reinforce the cultural changes that made Pinnacle different from other organizations, while ensuring that the lessons learned from her own experience continued to influence the company's development. The opportunity came when Pinnacle's second-largest client, a technology company called Innovative Solutions, faced a crisis that threatened their reputation and financial stability. A major product launch had failed catastrophically due to supply chain problems, customer service breakdowns, and communication failures that had escalated a manageable problem into a company-threatening disaster. Traditional marketing approaches were inadequate for addressing the crisis, which required the kind of systematic problem-solving and coordinated response that military personnel were trained to handle. Sarah recognized that this was exactly the type of challenge that would showcase Marcus's unique qualifications while providing Pinnacle with an opportunity to deliver exceptional value to an important client. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine whether Pinnacle had truly learned from its past mistakes or whether the cycle of judgment and discrimination would continue with a new generation of employees. The company that had been transformed by recognizing Sarah's hidden potential was about to discover whether those changes were permanent or merely superficial.